The following is a special presentation on CW7 Arizona.
Welcome to Before You Vote. I'm Mike Broomhead. This CW7 special program is here to help you, the voter, understand the 2024 primary election. We'll be talking with candidates and data analysts to give you insight into who and what is on the ballot. Today on the show, Tom Collins, the executive director of the Arizona Citizens Clean Election Commission, is here to discuss why we have a presidential preference election and how it affects the primary election later on. Then Arizona Secretary of State Adrian joins us to talk about election security. Is there anything to worry about? And has the voting process changed? We'll be back in exactly 60 seconds. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining us now is the Executive Director of the Citizens Clean Election Commission, Tom Collins. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, thanks, Mike, for having me.
Let's start out with what you do at the Clean Elections Commission. What is your role?
Sure. Clean Elections is a state agency that was created by voters about 25 years ago. And we really do three things. We provide voter education to voters, and that includes information on how to cast your ballot. It includes our candidate debate series. It includes providing different, basically anything you need to know to vote, we provide. And then on top of that, we do some campaign finance enforcement. So back in 2022, voters passed a new law in Arizona that requires spenders on elections to disclose more of their donors. And that's something that the commission's in charge of and responsible for enforcing. So those are the kind of our main activities.
So when candidates submit those forms, they go to your office and you review them to make sure they're accurate? Is that how part of that works?
Sure. So we have a clean program, which is this program where if a candidate wants to forego PAC money, the Clean Elections Fund, which is a state fund, will pay for them to run for office. It pays a small amount of money to run for office. The idea there being that because the dollars that go into a campaign give rise to that sort of notion of corruption, the idea of a quid pro quo. And part of what Clean Elections does is have an alternate program to that, which members of both parties take part in. And so we check all those to make sure that everybody who is qualified is properly qualified for funding.
So let's talk about the presidential preference election. Different than a primary.
Right.
And why do we have, first of all, why is it called that? But what is the difference between a presidential preference election and a presidential primary in other states?
Sure. The reason we call it a presidential preference election here in Arizona is to try to make a distinction from our state primary. So our state constitution set up a state primary system. That's going to be on June 30th this year. And so when the legislature was putting together what to do for this presidential nominating process, they gave it a different name, and they gave it some different rules. The reason it's called a preference election is because what you're really doing is telling the folks who are going to go to the Republican or Democratic National Convention in the summer who you want them to cast their ballot for. And of course, years ago, when in the early times of the primary, presidential qualification process, these were more competitive and they went on longer and they were kind of maybe a bigger deal. But we set ours up in a way that would be distinguished from that state primary. And the big distinction is that for our presidential preference election, if you're a Democrat, you can participate. If you're a Republican, you can participate. But if you're an independent, this election is not one you can participate in.
They would have had to change their voter registration in one party or the other.
That's exactly right.
In the primary, then they can choose which primary to vote in.
Correct.
But in the PPE, you have to be a registered Democrat or a Republican to cast your vote.
That's exactly right. That's as succinct as I've heard anyone put it.
Okay, so let's talk about that now, because what's confusing to a lot of people, or will be confusing when they get their ballots, is that now in the Republican side of things, Donald Trump is the last candidate standing.
Sure.
Nikki Haley has dropped out of the race or suspended her campaign.
Right.
But there's going to be 9 names on the ballot because they haven't officially ended their campaigns, right?
Right, and that's a really good question. It's actually a question we get calls from voters regularly. You know, what is with all of this? And the reality is that the timing that is required to file and then to print the ballots and those kinds of things would require those candidates to essentially give notice to the Secretary of State's office and the counties much earlier than possible. It's just a logistical issue, right? You just mentioned Nikki Haley. There's a fellow named Dean Phillips on the Democratic side who said today that he's suspending or withdrawing. I mean, those decisions are too late to change the ballot that's been printed.
Right, and isn't it all, I don't know if it's a requirement, I get maybe it doesn't matter, but because they haven't ended their campaigns, they've suspended it, they're officially still qualified and on the ballot.
Right. Basically, you know, the way that our ballot access laws are set up, you know, once you're qualified, somebody has to do something in order to get you off, right? Whether that's if something actually happened that affected your qualification, there might be a court that ordered your name off, or you might have to send something to the Secretary's office to take you off. But that status quo, that's sort of frozen at the point when the ballots get sent to the printer, because logistically at that point, once you're printing, you know, 1 million ballots, it's just not possible.
So before we close this out, let's talk a little bit about the debate process, because I know you are involved in the debate process. What will the debates look like, and where will people be able to see them?
Sure. So for 2024, we're looking at we have sort of 2 debate programs. One, which we are partnering with a firm here in town called Reister, along with the Arizona Media Association, will be for our statewide and federal candidates. So we're talking about the U.S. Senate, the Corporation Commission, congressional races, and those will be broadcast. And our goal there is to make sure that those broadcast debates are available to everyone. That is to say, they'll be available to television stations, they will be available at radio stations, they'll be available to newspapers, with the idea being that they're going to be put together in such a way they're not going to have all the branding of a local television station. They're going to be a standalone product that that we can ship out to as many people in Arizona as we possibly can. So we really think this is a historic partnership that should expand folks' access to this interaction between candidates. I mean, that's really what Clean Elections and the voters of past it really wanted to see was...
And non-biased.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's just kind of ask the questions, get the answers, you decide what you want when you hear the answers.
That's exactly right. And then for our legislative candidates, we have an online series of debates that feature usually local journalists, a lot of them print journalists, who and from the locales where those legislators are. So, for example, if you're in Sarita in southern Arizona, you know, we will have the editor of the Green Valley News will be the moderator for those debates, because we want to make sure not just that we're providing the broadest kind of questions on the issues people care about, but we want to make sure in those local races that we've got voices that know the candidates, know the issues, and know the voters.
I got to say thank you. I love what you guys do. It is such a necessary thing that happens here in Arizona and a great resource for voters. So I appreciate you coming down and talking about this.
Anytime. And, you know, if anybody has any questions about the PPE, you can go to our website, azcleanelections.gov/PPE. And our website's got everything you need to know.
All right, Tom Collins is our executive director. Stick around. We have more before you vote after this. Coming up next, we are breaking down the top stories that have been taking over the news. Plus, later in the show, hear from Secretary of State Adrian about election security and if the process changed. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Some significant developments in the election cycle. First, let's start with the Arizona Senate race. Senator Kyrsten Sinema has decided that she's not going to run for re-election. So we now know that Ruben Gallego is the Democrat candidate for Senate, and it looks as if Kari Lake will remain the Republican candidate because Sheriff Mark Lamb is still in the race, but most polls show her very far ahead. So looking at this head-to-head race, we now know that the GOP is fully behind Kari Lake, and they are going to throw a lot of money behind this campaign because this campaign may decide the balance of the Senate. Ruben Gallego is going to spend and is spending about $1 million in initial campaign ads. So this race is narrowing down to, it looks like, 2 candidates, and it's going to be a hotly contested race. You're going to want to keep your eye on it because your vote is going to be a significant part of this in this election cycle. Secondly, Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction Tom Horn recently gave his State of Education address to the legislature, and he focused largely on a couple of things. One of them was classroom discipline. When he talked to me about it, he said that when they poll teachers that are leaving the profession, they ask them why they're leaving. The number one answer at about 67% of teachers say teacher pay, but 61% in their response say that it has to do with discipline in the classroom. So what they are focusing on, and he is supporting a bill in the legislature, is it would require school boards that they would have to record whenever a teacher requires or requests discipline in their classroom. And if the school does not support that disciplinary action, they have to mark that down. And if they don't support the teachers enough, it could cost them eventually in the letter grade for the school. Now, that right now is a bill that's in front of the legislature. But where your vote comes in is a continuation of Prop 123. This is a piece of legislation that currently continues a 6.9% withdrawal from the state land trust for increases in teacher pay. Now, the Republicans in the legislature want you to vote to continue that. The governor and Democrats in the legislature want that to be at 8.9%, a 2% increase. Now, the weighing in on this is the state treasurer saying that she believes both are a little bit too high, that it would significantly drain the state land trust. But this is something that's important to you because we're losing a net of about 3,300 teachers per year in Arizona. And at that rate, we are going to significantly damage the classroom in a state that is growing a lot. So you're going to want to watch this moving forward because your vote is going to count significantly in all of these things as we move forward. All right, coming up, how secure are the elections in Arizona? Has anything changed since 2022? Secretary of State Adrian Fontes gives us his response next on Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining us now is the Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me back.
Let's, first of all, explain. Can you explain how the Secretary of State's office works with elections? What is your role in elections in Arizona?
So imagine that all of the folks that do elections are the teams in a major league, right? Let's just say the NFL. All of these teams are our 15 counties. They're the ones that do all the work. They do the recruiting for poll workers, the polling places, the ballots, all of that stuff. We are the commissioner's office. We make sure that the voting equipment is all certified. We make sure that the election officials are certified. We establish the rule book and the elections procedures manual. So while I'm the chief election officer, we really kind of oversee, and then we also deploy resources occasionally. The HAVA funds from the federal government get distributed out of our office. We make sure that folks have a lot of the other resources that they might need and sort of do that general coordination. We also do some of the intake on petitions and things like that, but the counties are the ones that do most of the work for elections.
And the way they handle it in each individual county, they decide how they're going to handle it.
Sure. Again, just like the sports analogy, right? If you're calling, if you're deciding to go for it on 4th and inches, that's up to the coach in that county. It's not up to us. The counties run the elections. We make sure everybody, they're all following the same set of rules, basically.
So who writes the rules? Do you yourself do that? Is it done through the legislature? If there's going to be a rule change, how does that happen?
So there's two ways that the rules generally get made. First and foremost, we have our statutes that go through the regular legislative process. The House and the Senate figure something out, and then the governor signs it or vetoes it, and then it becomes law. Those statutes also set up an elections procedures manual. That's where we come in and we'll say, here's what these statutes mean in this context. Here's what you got to look out for. Here's some of the processes and procedures you use to comply with these statutes. We're one of the few states in the country that has that kind of a rule book. Many other states, they'll have 15, 30, 80 counties, they're all just reading the statutes and doing whatever they think they need to do. So Arizona really does have a solid scheme for organizing and executing our elections.
So we've heard of lawsuits into your office or against your office. Where do those come from? What is the reasoning behind those, right or wrong? Why do they bring those lawsuits? Is that they're just disagreeing with the rule that's been made? What is it?
Yeah, essentially, there's 3 lawsuits against the Elections Procedures Manual that I was just talking about, right? The first one is brought by the Speaker and the President. And when we were drafting the manual, they said, well, we don't like the way that you are drafting this or this. So we took their input, and in some cases, we agreed with them and made some changes. And where we didn't agree with them, they've decided to take this to court. I don't really know why. I think some of it may be politically motivated. I mean, the Speaker is running for Congress after all. But anyway, they've got their rationale. The second case is from the Republican National Committee. Most all the issues in that one have already been decided by a federal judge, so I don't think that one's going to go anywhere. And then the third one is equally kind of on shaky ground. That one's been filed by the Free Enterprise Club, I think.
Okay.
So we've their EPM 1, 2, and 3. And basically, I think a lot of it is motivated by politics. But at the end of the day, what we're hoping for is quick resolution for everything, because we want to make sure that those election administrators, those teams at the county, have the rules, they know what they need to be doing, and they can do what they need to do for our voters.
So then let's talk about the big issue that's all been going on in Arizona now for a long time, is the election integrity issue.
Yeah.
What role do you play? You just said the counties implement the elections.
Yeah.
But at your level, what is it? How do you protect election integrity, and how do you ensure election integrity? Can you in your office, and what do you do if you can?
Yeah, well, the Secretary of State really does make sure that everybody is, like I said, following the rules. Let me give you an example from the prior administration, right? There was 2 supervisors down in Cochise County who decided that they were not going to certify the election because of some cockamamie scheme that they had in their heads, and they were interfering with the Secretary. Well, the Secretary sued them to enforce the rule, and the rule is they got to certify this canvass. They refused. They got a court order. Finally, one of the 2 flipped. They got the canvass out. Well, those folks ended up getting indicted. Those 2 folks that refused got indicted. Why? Because they didn't follow the rules. Our job is to make sure that the county officials across Arizona follow the rules. So we'll have phone conversations, we'll write letters if we have to. Most of the time what we do, though, is act as a liaison. And then we also have a critical role in the administration of elections. Arizona is a 13-1-1 voter registration state. It sounds a little complicated, but it's really not.
It does.
Here's the deal. There's a voter registration system that takes care of 13 of our counties. We've got Maricopa and Pima. Their data talks to our data at the state level. So we've got a statewide list pursuant to federal law, and 13 of those counties use a system that we administer for them at our office. It's called AVID system. It's clunky, it's slow, we need more money to get it up to where it needs to be, but we're getting by right now, and so that's another one of the roles that we play.
So as far as we had a conversation with the county recorder about early voting, because that's what he handles in Maricopa County. You play no role in early voting other than setting of the rules and dates, correct?
Well, we do help administer, like I said, in that AVID system, because that's actually the election management system for a lot of our counties, for those 13 counties. And so their interface with our office, we're sort of like kind of the IT department for that particular program, if you will. So we do play that role. We kind of are the trustee for their data, and so they interact with us in that way. But other than that, we really just make sure that everybody understands what the dates are. We also clarify some stuff. So for example, Judge Bolton from the Federal District Court recently ruled finally in the Mi Familia Vota trials, you know, that case that had been going on voter registration. So we got that ruling, and what we'll do is we'll look at the ruling and say, okay, we need to do this, 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 and this, and then we'll let the counties know, here's where we lay it out for you in a series of papers that we'll write based on the ruling. So we really kind of advise them and make sure that they understand what they're doing so that they'll all be doing the same thing, so that we have some standardization, even though they get to do some of the other stuff on their own.
I always appreciate the time, because I know that's been a big concern, and your office is doing all this work, and I wanted people to understand what role you play in it. So as always, I hope you'll come back and talk more as the election season goes on.
Anytime you need me, I'm happy to help you.
All right, it's Adrian Fontes, and this is Before You Vote. We'll be back. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Thank you to Executive Director of the Arizona Clean Elections Commission, Tom Collins, and Arizona Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, for being a part of today's show. Just as a reminder, the presidential preference election is happening this Tuesday, March 19th. If you haven't sent in your mail-in ballot, there's still time to drop it off at a designated location. To find a polling location or ballot drop-off, head over to aztv.com/vote. Join us next week here on Before You Vote.